now we're,
There we go.
well, that, it's not live yet.
Yeah,
You'll
we'll
see,
come on.
you'll start to see
Yeah,
the
it's
live.
always a little
You're good.
delay.
You're good.
Now now
Okay.
we should be good, yeah.
Am I in frame, Dre?
You're all set.
Apparently I've been out of frame a lot lately. Hello, everyone. I love to hear myself echo into the computer. Welcome to the May 2024 Legacies and Lunch, a hybrid program of the Cowles Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. I'm Heather Register Zabindon, the Programs and Website Coordinator for the Bobby L. Roberts Library of Arkansas History and Art at the Central Arkansas Library System. So until the main library reopens, we will be presenting here presenting Legacies and Lunch from UA Little Rock Downtown. And I always like to thank Marta and Emily for giving us a home for this program every month while the main library is being renovated. If you want to sign up for our email list and get more information about all the programs of the Roberts Library, so programs from our art collection, the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, Butler Center for Arkansas Studies, you can go to our website at robertslibrary.org and add your name and email address, and you will automatically get our email updates. You can also follow us on Facebook, X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. Please consider donating to the Cowles Foundation to support the programs of the Butler Center for Arkansas Studies and the Encyclopedia of Arkansas. You can go to robertslibrary.org and encyclopediaofarkansas.net to give a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Your support will be greatly appreciated. We will use your money very well. So this talk is being live streamed to YouTube and will be available to view on the Cowles YouTube channel immediately following the program. Today's speakers will answer questions at the end of the session. And for folks on Zoom, if you type your questions in the chat box, I will read them aloud and then the presenters can answer them. So today, we have a great team from UA Fayetteville who are working on the Rising Above in Arkansas project. So we're joined by Joshua Youngblood, Head of Instruction, Outreach, and Rare Books Librarian for the UA Library Special Collection. Kimball, I'm going to pronounce it wrong, right as I looked at it. Kimball Erdman, I hope I got that right, Professor of Landscape Architecture in the Fay Jones School of Architecture and Design, and Angie Payne, Technical Specialist at the Center for Advanced Spatial Technologies. Now, the Rising Above Arkansas project was funded in part by a grant from the U.S. Department of the Interior, the National Park Service, and the Japanese American Confinement Site grant program. It offers folks the opportunity to explore the complex history of the Rohwer and Jerome incarceration camps through interactive timelines and maps, archives of more than 3,000 digitized documents, including the high school autobiographies that are part of the Gould Vogel collection at the Cowles Butler Center for Arkansas Studies. It has a 3D reconstruction of a residential block inhabited between 1942 and 1945. On a personal note, these folks are really doing what we wanted to do in Life Interrupted in the early 2000s, but we didn't have the technology. We didn't have an architecture school and a spatial technology person to help us. So this is a very exciting project for those of us in the state, as well as folks who've been working in Japanese American incarceration history for a little while. So if everybody will give a warm welcome to our panelists. And now y'all can take it.
Okay, how does that look? Is everyone seeing the presentation? All right, I got a thumbs up, so we're looking good. Heather, thank you so much for such a wonderful introduction and for the invitation to present and talk with y'all today. We're really excited to be here. This is a project that I think I can speak for us all when I say it's very near and dear to our hearts. And that really goes beyond, I think, the blood, sweat, and tears that have went into it over the last 10 years. It has been going on for over 10 years now. But we've been very lucky in recent years to be able to share it with former incarcerees and their descendants who make annual pilgrimages to Arkansas. So there's a group of Japanese Americans who were incarcerated at Rohwer and Jerome when they were young. And they're obviously well into their 80s and 90s now, but they still make the trek to Arkansas to revisit these locations. And we've been able to connect with that group and to share this work, and they have it's been overall really well received, but they've provided just extremely valuable feedback and insights and possible, directions for a way forward. So just kind of a step back, quick history lesson. I'm assuming most everybody knows during World War II, following the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the U.S. systematically rounded up over 100,000 Japanese American, most of which were citizens, and placed them into 10 camps throughout the nation's interior. 8 of those camps were in the American West, primarily in the deserts, and 2 of those camps were in the swamps here in Southeast Arkansas at both Rohwer and Jerome. So this project kind of arose out of an observation that we have so much unique material here in different archives, disparate locations throughout the state that are specific to Rohwer and Jerome and to the Arkansas experience. And so that's kind of where the project started, was a need to digitize that material and to centralize it into a single online archive. Again, as Heather said, this work would not be possible without the support of the Japanese American Confinement Sites program. They have funded 3 phases of this work starting in 2013. The first 2 phases were dedicated to primarily to digitizing materials for the Rohwer camp and establishing the web framework that includes interactive maps, timeline, the interface design for the database, et cetera. All of that framework was designed in those first couple of phases. The third phase, which we published just last year, allowed us to add materials from Jerome to that existing web structure. So we've had 3 successful phases funded by JACS. We've actually submitted a 4th phase that I will tell you guys about kind of at the end of this presentation. I want you to see the site first so you have a little bit of context and background. So it wouldn't be possible without the work and dedication of all of our project partners. So we have Joshua here again from University of Arkansas Special Collections to walk you through the archive, but we have materials in the archive from the fantastic folks at State Archives and the Butler Center, UALR, ASU, and the World War II Internment Museum in Magee. So dedicated staff at each of those institutions have worked with us to digitize their materials, upload them with appropriate metadata to our site, and to contribute to this massive archive that we have created. Kimball Erdman in landscape architecture has been our primary historian on this project. He has led the research, mining hundreds, if not thousands, of documents and historical materials that talk about life in the camps. He's done this work with his students and on his own time, and has used that information to prepare a lot of the written materials that we have on the website. Again, my group at CAST has been primarily responsible for the technical side of things. So architecting the website, the interactive maps, all of the features that you see online. And myself, I'm also one of the lead artists on the digital reconstruction that we'll show you here. So I'm just going to try and jump right into it. This is what you see when you go to the project website. I put the URL in the upper right-hand corner for those that might want to follow along at home. Kimball is going to walk you through both the maps and the timeline features. Joshua is going to take you through our archive. I will pick up again at the end and talk about some of the connections graphs that we've been creating that are kind of a window to the archive. And I'll follow up with a brief discussion on the digital reconstruction. If you scroll on down the homepage, I encourage you to do so. We've added some good, just general kind of brief contextual history that talks about the camps. There's a lot of really good supporting images there right at the very beginning that are all from our archive that help illustrate what life was like for those that were forced to live here in Southeast Arkansas. If you scroll on down, there is a kind of a map to the site. I think you'll quickly see that any one of these web components is kind of a site in and of itself. So we wanted to provide the user with a quick understanding of what component of the site features what content. And with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and switch gears and hand it over to Kimball, who is going to walk you through the maps and the timeline.
Okay, so I'm assuming all is well. I see a thumbs up. So I want to echo Angie's, well, before I dive into maps and timeline, I do want to give a quick mention to my students. I was trying to estimate how many have worked on this project since we began working with Japanese American internment camps in Arkansas in 2011. And I'm going to say at least 40 undergraduate students have contributed to the efforts that you're going to see here produced in the website. I will say that, again, our primary, what my students and I have been doing is really providing that historical foundation from which all these other materials are going to be based. I also want to give a quick mention to historic American landscape surveys that we created for both, well, for the Rohwer Cemetery as well as the Jerome camp. If you're not familiar with HALS, or the Historic American Landscape Survey, it's part of heritage documentation programs administered through the National Park Service and published in the Library of Congress. And we have 2 reports, which are shown here. They're in the Library of Congress. They're also on our website if you're interested. These are more in-depth histories than is what's generally provided on the website. And for the cemetery, we also have a set of measured drawings that we created through laser scans with the assistance from CAST and the hard work of a lot of students. So I'd encourage you to take a look at those sets. As far as the 2 components that I'll be talking about today, the timeline is really meant to serve as a contextual introduction to internment in Arkansas. It's a fairly brief overview of about 40 stops in this timeline. And the timeline features, as you click on different stops, there's a bit of text here that shows up along with just a couple of primary sources with captions. In all, the timeline, again, covers a period of about 170 years. We begin the timeline with the Commodore Perry coming in and kind of forcing trade with Japan that is going to result in, well, at least contribute to the Meiji Restoration in Japan and the opening up of Japan's borders to people leaving Japan, coming to the United States, and the whole series of discriminatory policies in California and elsewhere that eventually are going to, of course, come to a head after the bombing of Pearl Harbor to Japanese American incarceration. And so that first section of those introductory events, all in this prelude section, we then have an incarceration section where, again, we're just hitting some of the major events that are happening during the World War II years, both specific to the camps in Arkansas, but also in terms of general events around the world that are contributing to this incarceration. The postlude section then looks at what happens afterwards. And again, just provides a brief overview of some of the major events that are happening both at the camps and the camps turning back into farmland, but also reparations, apologies from Reagan and others that again are affecting the former incarceree community. Again, the timeline is really just a brief component to help provide some of this contextual history. Conversely, the map section is going to be I'd say the kind of the star of the show. It's going to be the most informative portion of the website in terms of a deep dive into the history of the internment camp experience. Now, to really get the most out of this section, you really have to explore a lot. And so I would encourage you after our presentation to really take some time and the more you click on, the more information you're going to find. So let me just demonstrate really quickly the major components to kind of get you started, but I would certainly encourage you to spend some time with the website. And we'd love your feedback, by the way. But the maps are divided into 6 chapters that tell the story of incarceration in Arkansas. Everything from forced relocation at the beginning. And I should add that each of these chapters has several different sections. So forced relocation is going to be the collection of Japanese Americans into temporary assembly centers, and then eventually to one of 10 different relocation centers in the United States, including 2 in Arkansas. As you switch between different chapters, it brings up different maps that go along with the story. The story changes. Again, you can also click on these sections, and the sections will also change the maps. You'll notice that some of these maps are place specific. So this particular map is about Jerome, but we can also toggle to Rohwer, and it will take us immediately there, and we can get the information from Rohwer or Jerome. Other components of the map, in addition to the chapters and sections column on the left with its informative narrative there, we have this map contents page where you can control labels and layers, turn things on and off, in addition to toggling between the different camps. And like I said, everything's clickable. So as you select one of these items on the map, additional information will pop up on the right, give you more details, along with a couple of primary sources. As you click on one of those primary sources, we'll make it larger and pull up some additional metadata and links to where that source was found. I should also add that, let me see if I can find one here. In addition to photographs and documents, we also have a number of, let me hit pause so we don't interrupt our presentation, but we have oral histories that were collected by ULR, Life Interrupted, other programs that are all linked together into this website, making it a very robust collection of information on internment in Arkansas. In terms of the chapters, again, forced relocation is that first step of 6 of people coming together, being gathered together into these assembly centers. Again, all of these are clickable. You can find out information about them. You can also see who's coming from where. As we click on these routes, we can see numbers of people and where they're coming from, etc. The second chapter is going to be the construction of the camps. Everything from the pre-existing camps, what existed before. For example, Jerome was a New Deal community through the Farm Security Administration called Chico Farms. And it was planned for 2,000 40-acre farms. A few of them were built and people were living in them until they were then relocated for the creation of the Japanese internment camps. To the internment camp construction through the Army, but also the modifications made by internees when they were living on the camp. The Striving for Normalcy section is all about life in the camp, how Japanese Americans were struggling to live as normal a life as is possible in a concentration camp. Again, as you click on these different items, it will take you, these are place-based, and you can see what different types of activities were occurring throughout the camp. And again, these are tied, most of these sources are coming from our archive. So it's a way to kind of bring that archive alive. Creating community is kind of a similar message, but we're zooming into the block level and looking at the way in which Japanese Americans lived in their barracks, in these blocks, in these landscapes, everything from the back lanes where they hung their laundry and grew vegetables to their front lanes, what they called Tonori Gumi, or these front neighborhoods, and how they would plant them and have competitions, garden competitions, etc., or these play spaces with their basketball courts, etc. The two remaining chapters, Diasporas, is all about both temporary leaves as well as permanent leaves from the camp, as the camps are beginning to close, as people are spreading out across the United States. Again, the initial purpose of these camps was to really pull people out of their properties on the West Coast and force them to relocate to other parts of the United States. And a lot of that happened, as you can see from these maps. But eventually, many of the incarcerees in Arkansas were allowed to return to their homes, or at least homelands in California. And then finally, the last chapter is all about the erasure, what happens afterwards. And the quick point that I just want to make here as I conclude my remarks is that if you've been to either of these sites in Southeast Arkansas, you'll know that very little remains. These maps and the narrative will kind of point out some of the remnants that do, but I think more importantly, these maps demonstrate the importance of rising above and the need for this website, since so little of the actual physical memory of this experience remains, that it's so critical that online projects such as Rising Above are here to tell that story. And on that note, I'll turn it over to Joshua.
Okay, thank you very much, Kimball. It's always amazing when I see you navigate through all those stories and maps again. It really is astonishing to me. And I am going to share my PowerPoint. Okay, just a moment. Okay. So is that looking correct, or are you? Nope, you're on the wrong screen. Okay. Just a moment. Sorry for delay. I promise I practiced this just moments ago. There we go. All right. So as I was saying, I'm always amazed when Kimball and Angie explain all of the functionality on this website, because as an archivist, it's beyond gratifying to see these records, which I, of course, think of as so precious and important. And to see them contextualize, see them have meaning and be able to, of course, they had meaning before, but have the meaning be accessible and to have them associated with stories, and then to allow entry points for other people to come in and to understand the complexity of these stories and narratives so much more deeply, and to have access to all of these things. And so I'm going to be talking about all of the different archives contributions that we've had over the 10 years, which has contributed just so many amazing resources. And just, it's not just documents and photographs, of course. Kimball was showing one of the oral histories. So the oral histories collected over the years, so many things are available now. I'm just going to highlight some of the more recent ones, but I do want to talk about how our different archival partners have contributed over the years. So as Angie mentioned at the beginning, it's more than 3,000 digitized objects now that are just in the archive. And a lot of these are integrated into some of the other functionality on the site, but they're also just fully searchable. And so over the course of the last 10 years, we've had contributions from, I want to say nearly every Arkansas public institution, or publicly accessible archive that has Japanese American incarceree materials has contributed. And we have shared metadata and description for all of that. We've been very conscientious and careful over the years to get the metadata as right as we possibly can. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes about how it's still improving. But we worked with the Densho Project, which is out of Seattle, Washington, to make sure that the way we're describing things is in keeping with what Japanese Americans themselves, the owners of the Cultural Legacy, and other institutions that have very close partnerships, including the Japanese American National Museum, the university system in California. We're using metadata and descriptive schemes that match up with that, with what they're doing. And of course, that's still evolving. And we've been adding all sorts of objects. And it's not just, as I said earlier, not just photographs and boring old yellowing paper from the 1940s. It's fine art. It is three-dimensional objects. It is oral histories, and it's some which has been really exciting for me in the last phase of the project. It's some more contemporary materials as well. So taking the story all the way up to almost the present day, which is really amazing. Within the archival structure, we've also put in some really fun functionality. And so I'll talk for the next few minutes about that, including filtering and ways to target your searching. So if you have not shared this before with students, with high school researchers, with college researchers, with genealogists, I really encourage you to take this archive and show them all the functionality and how strategic you can be to get some really amazing resources out of here. And so, hearing you talk, Heather, at the very beginning reminded me, I just need to take a moment here. And I know there are a lot of archivists in the room there, hopefully listening as well, and people that work with cultural heritage resources. Thank you. As an archivist and on behalf of the state of Arkansas, and coming from Fayetteville, thank you so much, because we would not be able to make all these things available had you not done the really important work of stewardship, donor relations, community relationship building, nurturing those relationships over decades and decades to finally get to this point where we can share it and make it available to anyone around the world to use this material. So within all of these thousands of objects, there's lots of different collections represented, and there's lots of different types of materials. There's different subjects, there's different creators, and they actually link to each other in all these different ways. So we have this great filtering functionality, and this doesn't look very exciting, but this is very exciting. And I'll go through a couple of examples of this filter page. Allows you to search all of the results and then create subsets of your results and then see how all of the metadata links together. You can also browse specific collections within the archive, so you can narrow it down all the ways through, for instance, the Gould collection you mentioned earlier, Heather. You can go all the way to just the Gould collection, or you can back it back out and search on topics. You can just decide there's a certain type of object you want to look at. So for instance, something I do with middle school and high school students when showing the site is just going to oral histories or video histories, because that's going to be really compelling, and that might be something they could use in a documentary project they're working on or something like that. But then you can also combine the filters. So you can do collection and then item type, or you can do a certain camp, whether it's Rohwer or Jerome, and then associated with a particular collection. So I mentioned the topics. So we have a very long list of topic headings that are then associated down. So you can go from one topic heading, like activism and involvement. And again, this is going to be using the glossary and the shared language that Densho also uses. But then you can get even more specific right away. So whether it's activism and involvement, or activism and involvement and civil liberties, going all the way down. And you'll see that it's not just historical topics, but it's also material types and the way things were created we have in the topic list. You can look at the types of objects too right away. So I mentioned oral histories. One of the really exciting things in the last few years with our last iteration is the number of autobiographies written by students that are now available from 2 different sources, from collections in Little Rock and collections in Fayetteville. And then you put this alongside of fine art created, campaign materials, stuff collected from the pilgrimages over the decades, and you start to see this really rich and robust picture of the experience of Japanese American incarcerees, not just in the 1940s, but from the 1920s and 30s all the way up to the present. And then for the librarians and archivists in there, you do this with all your researchers. I do this all the time too. You can just be very smart on the front end and say, I just want things from this particular time range. Something Kimball was showing earlier is that the story maps and the narrative all in Rising Above actually goes all the way from the middle of the 19th century up to close to the present day. But you can move the date range around to look at all of that material and to target your searching in. And again, as I said earlier, you can use multiple filters. So you can build a really, really smart search right away and get to items very quickly. So I want to just also take a moment to thank my grad students. Kimball was thanking his students earlier, and I just have to give all the credit for what we've been able to do at the University of Arkansas Special Collections in Fayetteville to really two particular grad students, but also to our special collections staff, our digital services department. The two grad students I would call out in particular are now doctors. She was just an MA student when I started working with her, but Dr. Anne Marie Martin, who is a history faculty member now over in South Carolina, and an MA student named Taylor Cash, who is now teaching high school. They were both instrumental in not just scanning and selecting stuff, but actually going through and writing our descriptions, associating the metadata, doing all of the work for us. And I just got to sit back and say, wow, you guys found that, and then send stuff over to the CAST team. But so thank you to them, but thank you to all of the team members, whether it's here or it's Little Rock and other places, because it takes a whole lot of people to get such a complicated project like this up and going, and then to make it sustainable. And we won't get into all the meanings of the word sustainable today, but to have a project like this be usable and sustainable takes a lot of planning and a lot of work. And just real quickly, the image you're looking at on this page is actually a topic guide that we have at Special Collections, which allows you to do further research. One of the things that we're still doing, whether it's in a library department like mine, or it's through the latest phase of the grant application, is how to get this into the hands of educators more effectively. So any ideas you guys have, please let us know. This is just one attempt. This is how we allow people to find Rising Above at the UA library site and then see which collections are included in here. And next phase we're doing is we're taking digitized objects that are in the Rising Above archive and associating them with the finding aids in our special collections. So now you could be in one of our finding aids and you'll see a link that says, go to the digital object, and it'll actually take you directly to Rising Above. But those are just a couple of approaches. Any ideas that others have, I would love to hear them and talk more about them. So I'm going to talk just very quickly about some of the stuff we have contributed in the last phase. That's phase 3 of the project from our special collections. And then I'm going to highlight some other partners that have just put in some really, really interesting resources from archives that are telling it seems like an ever more complex story here. So our latest collections to come from special collections here in Fayetteville include the Jerome Relocation Center collection and the Robert Allen Leffler papers. Those are both very closely associated with legal documents. Kimball mentioned earlier incarcerees and internees being able to go off site to do work or thinking of life after. There's a lot of documentation in here about that actually, and what legal approval looked like. But then also there's a lot of thinking from the War Relocation Authority and federal authorities. And so some legal planning, some defense type memoranda, like how are we going to explain this? One of the most interesting things I found from the Robert Leffler papers, who went on to be dean of the law school in Fayetteville, was his rationale of how we're going to have to shape the history of this later. So those sorts of materials being selected and scanned to help add some layers to the story we tell about Japanese American confinement sites in Arkansas itself. We've also pulled some legal correspondence from the Lovell Relocation Authority and then the Virginia Tidball papers. And Virginia Tidball is one of the people teaching school in Jerome. And this is where we get a lot of our student essays and autobiographies that have now been contributed. I said earlier about metadata changing and evolving. Just one of the things we're doing here in UA Fayetteville, although we can't take credit for this. This is happening in a lot of universities around the country and other archives that have Japanese American materials, is reparative description. So bringing in Japanese American confinement site and incarceration records into a reparative framework where we're going back to look at how things were described and how they were made discoverable in decades past and trying to improve that. So on our end, we're now going through, and you'll see the subject strings on the lower right of the screen there, going through and making sure that we're using terms like concentration camp alongside previous terms like internment. This is ongoing work, and it is also being reflected in the Rising Above site and other databases that are available around the country. So just a little bit more about the kind of stuff that's in here now and the types of stuff you could discover, and also to show you a little bit more of how the filters and search tools work. So from special collections, again, you have, I mentioned our legal correspondence, or you could go directly to one of those other collections. So the filter here, if I'm going by collection, I have it located all the way down to the Virginia Tidball papers, because I wanted to get to that bottom bullet point, autobiographies of students. I could go directly to it and start looking at them. And then if I were to find some objects to search through, I have them fully digitized, scanned, and transcribed. And so now you'll see the metadata schema that we were talking about, which again is changing all the time. So you have the handwritten autobiography of a student who is incarcerated in Jerome. And then you have a description of it. You have all the other terms, the things that would be included in that autobiography, Pearl Harbor and aftermath, their experience in the public school system, what conditions were like in California versus conditions in Arkansas. And then you have a full transcription of it as well. And then it's fully searchable. With the legal documents, I won't spend a lot of time on this page because nothing's more boring than a legal memoranda. Apologies to any lawyers there in the audience. But this is just one of the documents that we have added in the last couple of years. And it actually looks to a really relevant discussion. What is public opinion of Japanese American incarceration and how is it changing? And these are the lawyers working for the War Relocation Authority having this debate, even as they are determining the fate of incarcerates themselves and what their lives are going to be like in the very next few months after a document like this was written. And this comes from Racism and Reason, a document drafted by Philip Glick, one of the lawyers with the WRA. So I mentioned there's some other, I wanted to give a special credit to some of the other archives and archivists that have contributed in the last few years. Life Interrupted, as Heather mentioned earlier, I think, Life Interrupted, an amazing project from 2004. We've now been able to take examples from the archive, they've been digitized, and now they're available in a sustainable manner, let's hope. I think it's going to be great because we have all of these hundreds of things now searchable going into the future. And all sorts of materials from oral histories to videos to private families' collections that Life Interrupted was able to bring together are now in the archive as well and now part of the other search tools on the website. So just a quick look at some of the amazing images from family collections. So 412 photographs, art pieces, and documentation that were part of Life Interrupted now in the archive as well. Just an example of how these documents and photographs and other artifacts interact. You have a photo from before removal here on the left, and then photos of the same family during the removal experience, and then showing the Archival Nerd stuff here, the description, and metadata allows you to connect these things together. Thank you again to the Life Interrupted team, all of you that are in that room. The Arkansas State Archives has also made incredible contributions. And the next couple of slides I stole directly from Bridget Wood. Thank you, Bridget, who created these, but highlighting some of the amazing stuff from the Arkansas State Archives. So again, you can see a collection scope here from the filter, including the John Albert Trice Rohwer collection, who was superintendent of schools there, and the Joseph Boone Hunter collection, who was the human resources director, and also someone who knew about as much about the Japanese Americans and the Japanese culture as anyone in the United States from a white background could have in the 1940s, and their family papers and also their professional papers included. Just some examples from the Hunter collection here, just really amazing things. You see the titles and the descriptions and all of that. Hunter's background, his personal life, and then the work of people that, the things created and the stories of people that he was interacting with at the camp. This right here is a scrapbook put together by incarcerees given to Joseph Hunter, now fully transcribed and available, showing their gratitude and appreciation and just really illustrating the close relationship he had with the people there. And here's the transcription of it, all available from just searching through those ASA contributions. Then they also went through and selected things from the general photograph collection. This is filtered by that collection from ASA as well as Jerome. And you can see all the Jerome photos there. And I also wanted to shout out to the McGee Museum from the Japanese American Relocation Center, who made really amazing contributions as well in the last cycle. And we're so excited to have the papers of Brad Shirakawa and others that are held down there at the museum, which get to something I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, which is the ongoing story of former internees and their descendants. And so what's the experience like afterwards? The campaigns to keep the story going, reunions of the 442nd, all this amazing stuff. And so now we have contributions from Brad Shirakawa and others held at down at McGee. Again, filtered by collection, and just this incredible material from the decades since the closing of the camps. And how about that for a metadata string? Love it. That's beautiful. And then this is the Japanese American 447 combat team, the ongoing work, and the stuff telling their story all the way up through the 1990s and 2000s. And with that, thank you again to the archivists. Thank you to Angie and Kimball, and I will end it there.
All right, thanks, Joshua. I'm going to jump in and wrap up. Okay, I am definitely mindful of time. Oh, come on. There it goes. All right. So yeah, it's 12:43. I'm gonna buzz through the last two components of the site and try and give them proper credit because they're kind of interesting, especially these connections graphs. So the connections graphs, I don't know if you noticed, they're not a direct link from the home page, but if you click on archive, you have the option to go to the archive or to view one of two connections graphs for both Rohwer and Jerome. So these are pretty unique. I call it kind of a window to the Rising Above archive. It stems from the names metadata field that we collected as part of our archival entry. So I don't know if you noticed when Joshua was flipping through some of the archival metadata, we have individual names associated with documents and things in the archive. So for example, if we have a letter that mentions, multiple people, that name is preserved and associated with that letter. So that has allowed us to kind of look at how people were connected to one another at either Rohwer or Jerome based on their connections to items in the archive. So it was kind of an initial attempt to try and maintain some of the physical connections of items in the archive. So for example, when you are looking through a folder of materials in a collection and you run across a series of letters written between two individuals, and you get that exchange back and forth. When you upload those letters as individual items in an online archive, you lose that series, right? But if you record the individual names, then you can see that those two individuals are related to one another through that series of letters. So that's kind of how it started. What we end up with is what we call a social network graph on the right-hand side. So the names that are clustered together in this graph are people who are likely connected to one another because they're referenced in the same archival documents. So just a quick rundown, individuals are represented with blue nodes. So they are blue. And then different items in the archive are color-coded according to type. So yearbooks are pale blue, autobiographies are green, etc. Okay. Again, we did one of these graphs per camp because if we put all of this data together, it was too much information and we lose any kind of hierarchy because there's so many people, there's tens of thousands of people that are referenced. So again, individuals are your blue nodes. They're connected to archival items. And then the size of the node indicates its level of connectedness. So basically, your larger nodes in the graph have more things that are connected to them. So that's kind of the basic rule there. So what we end up with when you zoom in to the connections graph, I believe this one is for Rohwer, and you hover over an individual. In this case, I'm hovering over Sam Yada. Mr. Yada's family was the only recorded family that stayed in Arkansas when the camps broke up. And when everybody, quote unquote, went home or went to a life elsewhere, there was one family, the Yada family, that stayed in Arkansas. So if I hover over Sam's name, I get a list of items on the left-hand side. Those are all of the items in our archive that reference Sam. So we can quickly see there's 3 audio files, there's multiple letters, multiple publications, etc. But as I start looking around Sam in the graph, I quickly see that his wife Haruye is nearby, along with their 2 sons, Robert and Richard. And the reason why those names have been clustered together in this graph is because they are referenced in, excuse me, let me go back up. They are referenced in a lot of the same archival items. So as I kind of go back and forth, you see that their names are referenced in a lot of the same publications. That's why they're clustered. So now I'm going to focus on Richard. And again, I have the list of items on the left-hand side that show all of the things in the archive that we have that mention Richard's name. And now if I start hovering over the items on the left, I can see what archival items mention Richard's name, but I also see other names that are referenced. So by hovering over the list on the left, I can quickly see who Richard has connections with based on their commonality or their reference to these archival items. So I can quickly see he has a lot of connections with Rosalie Gould. He obviously has a lot of connections with his family members, but also with Dr. Hunter and Nat Griswold. And so again, this is basically an algorithm that has created this. It's what we call a social network graph. It's a way to see how people are connected to one another. We could do it in modern times with, Facebook or Instagram, and it's your friends of friends, basically, right? But it's applied, it's the same kind of technique applied to the historical record and applied to a historical archive. And we think it reveals kind of some interesting connections between people at the camp. And we hope others find it interesting as well. I know it's a little daunting when you first open this graph. You're like, what is this and what do I do with it? So we hope to add some instructions on how to better use it in future times. But again, it's something that we hope that others find useful as well. So you can then just click on Richard's name and you can go, it takes you to the archive, and these are all of the items that we have in the archive that reference Richard. So that's it on the connections graph. On the last component, we're at 1250. I am so sorry. And I'm always buzzing through this, and I know it makes Kimball cringe because this is a part of the project that we completed in phase 2. So it's kind of considered older at this point, but that really doesn't make it any less cool. It's kind of fun. We created a digital reconstruction of a single barracks block or neighborhood block at Rohwer using game engine technology. And the purpose of doing this is we wanted to create an educational tool for kids primarily to better understand what the camps look like and what it was like for those that lived there. We feel like this is particularly effective because, again, if you go to Rohwer and Jerome today, there's absolutely no evidence of the camps. All of the buildings were sold off, the land returned to agriculture. So by using historical documents, we've been able to recreate that environment as best as we can based on the resources that we have in full 3D. So we have government construction drawings that gave us the exact dimensions of the buildings, but then we didn't want the buildings to look perfect. We wanted to show them what they look like after they'd been lived in for a while. So we had to add porches and structures and vegetation. And we end up with something like this. It's not perfect, but it's close. It gives a sense of what this environment looked like. And this is an application that you can completely download. You can explore, you can walk through it on your own. There are multiple stops that provide additional context and information that reference those items in the archive that Joshua talked about, as well as materials from other archives. If you're not familiar with this technology, I recommend you take the automated tour. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. I think it's definitely time. We are seeking to develop curriculum for the site, like Joshua mentioned before. This is part of our proposition in phase 4. We're also going to be incorporating some of those reparative descriptions that he mentioned that they are working on as special collections. We want to add that to our site as well, and to hopefully work more with incarcerated families, those that we've met at pilgrimages in the past, to upload personal family materials to the collection. So I'm going to end with taking you to just a quick, this is a video that plays in the background whenever you go to click on the digital reconstruction to download it. This to me shows that it's truly 3D, so it kind of gives you a sense of the environment. You do have to download it. It is on a Windows specific machine. It doesn't work on Chrome or MacBook, but once you download it, then you have access to the full digital reconstruction. And I think that's everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joshua, Kimball, and Angie. You were fine, Angie, on time, and it wasn't your fault. Any questions from the in-person audience before we get to a few things on Zoom? And my own questions, of course. Okay, no questions from the audience. I'm staring them down. So I do want to say my colleague, okay, there we go. My colleague here at CALS, Heather Pressgrove, the other Heather, says she doesn't have a question, but she's in awe of the thoughtfulness, intentionality, and incredible hard work that has been put into this. And I definitely echo that. I mean, I said it in the beginning, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it over and over again if I have to. This is what we dreamed of in Life Interrupted. I mean, we sat around and said, oh, it'd be so cool to have a 3D model to give people, I mean, because you do, you go down to Jerome and Rohwer, and I took hundreds of people down there in 4 years, and I still take some people down there every once in a while, and they can't understand what they're looking at. It's a cotton field with a cemetery, and then, you know, a smokestack at Jerome, and so it's hard to conceptualize this as an incarceration center when all they see is a cotton field. So, so yeah, thank you so much for that, for all of us who have worked in this field for the 20 plus years I've been in it. Thank you for doing that. And I also want to commend you on focusing on the West Coast and the racism that existed on the West Coast. I think one of the things that we struggled with in Life Interrupted was that people didn't, I mean, this just didn't happen overnight. This didn't just happen on December 8th, 41, where, you know, the government and the military decided we were going to round up a bunch of Japanese Americans. You know, this was a long time coming over decades. So I love that y'all included that. So my question is, one of the things that we never really figured out was why Arkansas? Why were these camps placed, not just in Arkansas either, but why were they placed where they were placed? Have y'all had any luck figuring that out? I was so weird.
I could speak to that if you guys want. So yeah, there are several factors that went into site selection. Part of it's going to be choosing land that is easy to obtain, ideally already owned by the federal government. And so part of the reason why Arkansas is because both of these properties, at least a large portion of them, were already part of they're already part of government programs through the New Deal, Farm Security Administration housing for Chico Farms, in the case of Jerome. But even Rohwer had portions of its property that had been slated for New Deal development, but not actually, it wasn't actually conducted yet. Another important factor was accessibility. These sites, all 10 sites needed to be remote in terms of, away from important sites and out of unfounded fears of security concerns, but they also had to be accessible by rail. And so both Jerome and Rohwer, for example, are off of major rail lines, and the same is going to be true for the other 8 sites that are selected. So these are remote sites on federal land or easily accessible land for the federal government to get. So yeah, and the other thing that they had to have enough acreage. We're focusing on the core of the campus, the small square mile area, but both Rohwer and Jerome were thousands and thousands of acres because, well, specifically the Japanese Americans, when they came to Arkansas, they were not allowed to work for Arkansan farmers, or they had to stay on camp boundaries. Interestingly enough, German POWs, Italian POWs didn't have to follow those rules, but Japanese Americans did. Which meant that Japanese Americans needed extra lands for employment purposes, et cetera. So they were put to work digging ditches and logging, et cetera, with the expectation for Arkansans that the Japanese Americans were going to get these lands ready for farming and kind of provide a benefit to Arkansas. So it may be a long answer to your question, but hopefully I got some of it in there.
No, that's exactly what we were thinking. We just struggled finding at the time finding information to support it. So I'm glad that that's still the thought, the prevailing thought. So what has been the response from the incarcerated survivor community? I mean, have you had former inmates approach you to have their things added to the collection, and then you have to send them to an archive so it can be, how would that work?
I think I'll start on that. Overall, this project has been really well received. And like I said before, they've also provided a lot of really valuable feedback. So I know for the 3D reconstruction, we shared that product with them after phase 1, and got insights about what we got right and what we got wrong, and based on memory of the site. So we were able to incorporate a lot of their suggestions into a second phase of that reconstruction. So and we couldn't have got that input anywhere else. There's only so much information that we can obtain from the historical record. And a lot of times, particularly in the case of Rohwer and Jerome, that information can be biased or it can be staged. And so that was just incredibly valuable. With regards to personal collections, we presented at the pilgrimage last year. And I think at that pilgrimage is probably the biggest response that we got of can we contribute our family's materials? And so that really is part of what prompted the proposal for phase 4 is to get funds to start working directly with family members so that we can figure that process out. And we have some ideas about how we think it could work. Because you have the physical items themselves. Some family members are interested in donating those items to an archive. Some people are interested in digitizing them themselves, keeping the physical items, but then contributing a digital asset to the archive. So it's going to be kind of on a case-by-case basis. And I know Joshua has some ideas about how that might look. we really don't know. That might be kind of by the seat of our pants, to be completely honest. So, but we'll figure it out.
Josh, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I thought Angie said it all. I mean, we have been in discussions with a few people, and we would love to work on a way to help families and communities do their own, maintain their own collections while helping with digitization and discovery, if that's desired, or ways to just just return objects and just do a smaller selection. But we really want it to be family and community led going forward. We would love to keep collecting everything, but I don't have to tell y'all this. I mean, there's capacity issues, but also there's ownership issues, and who really has the custodial care and who should be taking that on. But very excited that people want their family stories to be included.
Yeah, that's the experience I had. We would digitize things for people when they wanted us to, or we would take it into the Life Interrupted collection if it needed to be. So one last question, I know we're a little bit over time, but how are teachers and educators, particularly in Arkansas, using this platform in their classrooms? What kind of feedback are you getting from them?
So that's really kind of been on an individual case-by-case basis at this point, because that is one thing that is definitely missing from our site, and that is site-specific curriculum that incorporates this site into classrooms. So admittedly, that's kind of been a gap, I'm going to say, in the last 10 years of work on this. But that is something that we hope to do as part of this next phase. If we're successful, we're working with a group at UCA to develop curriculum so that the site can be used more in classrooms. There's a lot of technical issues and considerations, which I know you can only, Joshua's leaving. Bye, Joshua.
Bye, sorry, I have a student at the door. Speaking of using these
that's
resources,
okay.
I have to go
That's
meet a
okay.
student. So.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll wrap up. So for example, the digital reconstruction that we really want used in classrooms only plays on Windows computers. And a lot of schools use Chromebooks. So that's a major technical challenge that we're going to have to figure out. If they don't have access to that full visualization, are there ways that we can make it somehow accessible for those that don't have the exact computer requirements to view it? So there's a lot of technical hurdles to figure out there. But realistically, that's something that we want to grow as part of the next phase of the project.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Thank you to the panel for talking today and telling us about this great project. Now, if I can make my technology work and switch back, a few closing announcements. Next month, where'd it go? There it is. Okay. First of all, next Friday, a week from 2 days from now, on May 10th, we will have Second Friday Art Night at the Cox Building across the parking lot or across Library Square. It's called Rocket Lab now, but most people know it formerly as the Cox Building. So we will have art for sale by local artists and live music, and you can also come and knit. So make a night of art, music, and mingling, and join us for Second Friday Art Night, which is underwritten by the Wingate Foundation. Next month, for Legacies and Lunch, we will have Josh Smith here from UCA to talk about Zach. Did I say Josh? Okay, sorry. Too many 4-letter name people. Zach, thank you, Allie. Zach Smith will be here from UCA to talk about Chinese Americans in Arkansas, or Chinese in Arkansas. Something like that, yeah. Again, looking at Allie to give me confirmation. So next, the first Wednesday of June here at UA Little Rock Downtown. So thanks everybody for being here. Thank you, Angie and Kimball, for being here again. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation. We appreciate it.